The knock didn't sound urgent. It sounded final. 3 slow knocks, measured, controlled, like whoever stood on the other side already knew how this would end. When I opened the door, the word son was still safe in my mouth. 30 seconds later, it would taste like blood. 2 police officers stood on the porch. Rain dripping off their caps, hands resting near their belts, not threatening, just prepared. The taller one said my son's name out loud, carefully. The way people say names right before they break something precious. We're here to arrest him for the theft of $500,000. The world didn't explode. That's the lie movies tell. The world went quiet. Too quiet. Like all the air had been sucked out and replaced with waiting. My son Arav stood behind me in the hallway. 19 skinny shoulders. Still wearing the hoodie I bought him 2 winters ago. His eyes met mine, wide and confused, and in that moment I knew, deep in the bones of me, that whatever this was, it wasn't him. What theft? I asked. My voice surprised me, calm, controlled. The officer glanced at his tablet. Corporate embezzlement. Offshore transfers. Digital trail leads to an account in his name. Arav laughed once. A sharp, broken sound. I don't even have $500. They cuffed him gently. That hurt more than if they'd slammed him into the wall. As they led him away, he didn't cry. He didn't beg. He just looked back at me and said, quietly, "Please don't let them change who you think I am." The door closed. The house stayed standing. Something inside me did not. The first night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with the light off, listening to the refrigerator hum like it was thinking. I replayed every conversation, every teacher meeting, every late-night talk where Arav confessed fears instead of sins. Nothing fit. By morning I had one name circling my mind like a vulture. Raghav Mehra. My brother-in-law. My late husband's business partner. The man who smiled too much at funerals and called me sister, only when other people were listening. 3 months earlier, I had refused to sign over my husband's remaining shares to him. I'd read the papers carefully. I'd said no softly. He'd smiled anyway. "You should be careful," he'd told me. Almost kindly. The world isn't gentle with women who don't understand business. I understood now. The lawyer confirmed it without meaning to. The stolen money had passed through a shell company, one I recognized. It was registered under a trust my husband had once mentioned, something Raghav handled. The system didn't care about truth. It cared about paperwork, and on paper, my son was guilty. So I did what I've always done best. I stayed controlled. I sold my car. I refinanced the house. I hired a forensic accountant who didn't ask questions, and a lawyer who asked only the right ones. I visited Arav every week, sitting across the glass. Never crying where he could see. "They're trying to scare you," he said once, forcing a smile. "You don't have to destroy yourself for this." I leaned forward, palm flat against the glass. "I'm not destroying anything," I said. "I'm building a door." Raghav didn't expect silence from me. That was his first mistake. I attended family dinners like nothing was wrong. I laughed at his jokes. I praised his success. I let him believe I was tired, overwhelmed, manageable. When he offered help, I thanked him. Control, I learned, makes people careless. Late nights I followed money. Not emotionally, methodically. Transaction by transaction, layer by layer. I found the pattern's small diversions, routed through minors' accounts, cleaned through charities, then pooled and moved. Elegant. Almost beautiful, almost. The accountant looked at me one night and said, "Whoever did this assumes no one will look closely. Or that anyone who does won't survive it." I smiled. They don't know me. When we finally moved, we didn't accuse, we revealed. The courtroom was full when the evidence unfolded, screens lighting up with charts, dates, signatures. The prosecution's confidence cracked first. Then Raghav's lawyer stopped smiling. Then Raghav himself went pale, the way men do when control slips through their fingers. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Mehra," she said slowly, "can you explain why these accounts, linked to your trust, show authorization under your biometric signature?" Raghav turned to look at me. I met his eyes and gave him the same smile he'd given me months ago, soft, polite, devastating. Arav was released that afternoon. Charges dropped. Name cleared. The reporters swarmed hungry for drama, but I shielded my son with my body like I always had. Raghav was arrested 2 days later, quietly, no cameras, no kindness. That night, Arav sat at the kitchen table where I had once broken in silence. He watched me make tea, his hands steady now. "You were so calm," he said. "The whole time." I set the cups down and finally let my shoulders fall. "No," I said. I was focused. He reached for my hand. "They tried to use me to hurt you." I squeezed back. "They forgot something." "What?" I looked at the dark window, at our reflection layered over the night. "They thought control meant weakness," I said softly. "They never learned what happens when someone keeps it." The trial didn't end when the verdict was read. That was just the moment the public stopped watching. After Raghav's arrest, people spoke in whispers again. Family members who had avoided my calls suddenly remembered my name. Neighbors who once believed the headlines now smiled too hard when they saw us. Arav tried to return to college, but innocence doesn't erase memory. Eyes still lingered. Silence still followed him into rooms. One night, he stood in the doorway of my bedroom, unsure like he used to be when he was small and afraid of the dark. "They ruined something," he said. "I feel it. Like I'll never be light again." I sat up and patted the bed. He sat beside me, shoulders tight. "They wanted that," I said. "They wanted you bent." Quiet. He swallowed. "Did you ever want to stop? While you were fighting?" I thought of the nights my hands shook too hard to hold a pen, of the fear that crawled into my chest whenever an unknown number called, of the way Raghav's smile haunted my dreams. "Yes," I said. "Every day." "Then why didn't you?" I turned to him. Because stopping would have meant agreeing with them. That was when I realized something dangerous had taken root inside me. Not relief, not peace. Resolve. Raghav's empire didn't collapse overnight. Men like him build redundancies, friends in high places, favors owed, secrets buried deep. Even from jail, he still had reach. Shell companies dissolved quietly. Witnesses forgot details. One accountant suddenly moved abroad. The lawyer warned me. "You've won enough," she said carefully. "Pushing further might provoke retaliation." I nodded. I smiled. I pushed anyway. I didn't want revenge that screamed. I wanted revenge that erased. I wanted his name to rot quietly. Professionally, permanently. I started with the board members who'd benefited from his schemes without asking questions. I didn't accuse them. I educated them. I sent anonymous packets, perfectly organized, each page a mirror they couldn't look away from. Some resigned within days. Others tried to fight and failed. Then the charities. I spoke at events, donated small amounts, asked polite questions about transparency. Journalists started calling. Not because I demanded attention, but because the truth kept leading back to me. Raghav called from prison once. I almost didn't answer almost. "You've made your point," he said. No greeting, no affection. Just irritation wrapped in restraint. "This won't bring your husband back." I closed my eyes at the sound of his voice. Still controlled. "No," I said. "But it will make sure you don't replace him." There was a pause. A real one. Fear slipping through the cracks. "You're destroying more than me," he said. "Family? Stability." I leaned against the counter, looking at the small crack in the wall Arav made years ago when he kicked a ball indoors. I'd never fixed it. "You already did that," I replied. "I'm just making it visible." When the line went dead, I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. Months passed. Arav grew stronger. He laughed again, not often, but honestly. He got an internship with a firm that believed in second chances because they believed in facts. He stopped flinching at sirens. As for me, people began to treat me differently. With caution. With distance. Control changes how the world sees you. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, I stood alone in the courtroom where it had all turned. Empty benches. Dust floating in the light. I sat where I'd once sat, heart pounding, waiting to hear if my son would be free. I realized then that revenge hadn't healed me. But it had protected him. And that was enough. When Arav joined me at the door, he looked back at the room and said, "Do you think he regrets it?" I thought of Raghav in his narrow cell, surrounded by the ruins of his own precision. "I think," I said slowly, "he regrets underestimating silence." We stepped outside together. The door closed behind us, not loudly, not dramatically, controlled. Final. The city moved on faster than I expected. Scandals age quickly, outrage has a short memory. New names replaced Ragovs in the papers. New villains, new distractions. That was fine. I wasn't chasing noise anymore. What lingered were the aftershocks, the subtle shifts that never make headlines. Banks began calling me ma'am with care. Old associates of my husband returned documents they'd misplaced. Invitations arrived with handwritten notes instead of printed ones. Control, I learned, has a gravity to it. Once people feel it, they orbit carefully. Erav changed too. Not softer, sharper. He listened more than he spoke. He measured rooms the way I once measured balance sheets. I watched him become someone who understood that safety is not given, it's built. One night he asked, "Did it change you?" I was washing dishes, the rhythm steady. Yes. For better or worse. I considered the question the way I'd learned to consider risk. For real, I said. The past has a way of knocking again when you least expect it. It came as a letter. Not from Ragov, he'd been advised to stop contacting me, but from someone who knew him well. The paper was thick, expensive. The ink precise. "You took more than you realize," it read. "And you left things unfinished." No signature. I didn't show Erav. Not because I was afraid, but because I recognized the move. Someone was testing the perimeter. Feeling for weakness. I didn't respond. Silence is only powerful when it's intentional. Days later, a journalist called. Then another. Questions that felt rehearsed. Angles too neat. Someone was trying to stitch a new story. One where I wasn't a mother protecting her son, but a woman who overreached, who manipulated outcomes. I smiled into the phone and said nothing useful. At night, I reopened files I'd archived. I hadn't destroyed anything. I'd learned long ago that destruction limits options. Patterns re-emerged. A second network. Smaller. Cleaner. Not Ragov's style, too cautious. That's when I understood. Ragov had never been alone. He was the face. Someone else had been the spine. I followed the money again, slower this time. Like a predator conserving energy. The trail led to a private equity firm with impeccable branding and impeccable deniability. Their legal walls were tall. Their hands were clean. Almost. I attended a gala they sponsored, wearing a simple black dress and the calm that makes people curious. I listened. I asked questions that sounded naive. I laughed when it was expected. One man watched me too closely. He was older than Ragov, quieter. His eyes didn't blink often. "Memes. Mera," he said, approaching me with a practiced warmth. "I'm sorry for what your family went through." I met his gaze. "Thank you. We all suffered," he added. I tilted my head. Some of us more than others. His smile tightened. A fraction. Enough. That night I didn't sleep. Not from fear, from clarity. I didn't want to dismantle another empire. I wanted to end a habit. So I changed tactics. I stopped pushing evidence upward, and started pulling trust downward. I placed truth where it would be discovered by those who feared liability more than exposure. Auditors noticed inconsistencies. Regulators asked questions. Quiet ones. The firm didn't collapse, it corrected itself. Leadership shifted. Certain partners retired early, very comfortably, very quickly. The man from the gala disappeared from public view. Erav noticed my fatigue before I admitted it. "You don't have to keep going," he said gently. "I'm okay." I looked at him, at the steadiness in his eyes, and felt something loosen. "I know," I said. "That's why I can stop." The last call came on a Sunday morning. Unknown number. I answered. "You win," a voice said. "Just tired." I closed my eyes, sunlight warming the kitchen floor. "This isn't a game." A breath. "What do you want?" I thought of the house, still standing. Of the crack in the wall I'd never fixed. Of my son free. "Nothing," I said. "That's the point." I hung up and blocked the number. Years later, people would ask how I did it. How I kept my composure when everything was on the line. I never gave them the answer they wanted. Because control isn't the absence of emotion. It's the decision to let nothing wasted guide you. On Erav's graduation day, the sky threatened rain but held back. He hugged me hard, then whispered, "You saved me." I shook my head. "I stood with you." As the crowd cheered, I felt the weight finally lift, not because the past was gone, but because it no longer owned me. Revenge had never been the fire. Control was, and I kept it. The years that followed didn't arrive gently. They arrived like quiet tides, steady, inevitable, reshaping everything without asking permission. Arav moved to another city for work. Not to run, not to escape, just to breathe where no one knew his name. On the day he left, he hugged me longer than necessary, then said something that stayed with me. "You taught me how to survive without becoming cruel." I watched his train disappear and understood something most people never do. Letting go is the final act of control. The house grew quieter. Not lonely, intentional. I converted my husband's old study into a small office. No company name on the door. No announcements. People found me anyway. Not the desperate, not the loud. Only those who had been cornered by powerful men and needed someone who understood how systems bend. I never promised victory. I promised clarity. Word spread carefully. Women mostly, a few men. They came with folders, bruised reputations, trembling hands. I listened more than I spoke. I showed them how to document, how to wait, how to move one piece at a time until the board shifted. I never appeared in court again. That was the rule. One evening, while sorting old files, I found a photograph tucked inside a ledger. My husband and Raghav, younger, arms around each other, smiling like men who believed the future belonged to them. I studied Raghav's face, the confidence, the entitlement, the certainty that consequences were for other people. I didn't feel anger. I felt distance. That's when the past tried one last time to reach me. Raghav was dying. The prison doctor called. Liver failure. Months, maybe weeks. He'd requested to see me. I didn't answer immediately. I made tea. I sat by the window. I listened to the city breathe. When I arrived at the prison, the guards treated me with a strange mix of respect and caution. His cell was smaller than I imagined. He looked smaller too. Not broken, reduced. "You came," he said. Surprised. I sat across from him. "You asked." He studied my face, searching for something: triumph, bitterness, regret. I gave him none. "I thought," he said slowly, "that if I controlled everything long enough, nothing could touch me." I nodded. "That's a common mistake." A faint smile. "You never hated me, did you?" I considered the question honestly. "No, I hated what you did. I hated that you thought my son was collateral." His eyes closed briefly. "I underestimated you." "Yes," I said, "you did." Silence filled the space between us, not awkward, not tensed, just real. "Will you forgive me?" he asked. I stood. "Forgiveness?" I said gently, "isn't part of every ending." I left without looking back. He died 3 weeks later. The obituary was short. Polite, incomplete. Life continued, as it always does. Arav visited often. He brought stories of work, of friends, of a woman he loved cautiously but sincerely. I watched him build something honest. Something untouched by my battles. One afternoon he asked, "Do you ever regret it?" I knew what he meant. "No," I said. "But I don't glorify it either." "Would you do it again?" Really looked strong. "I'll leave." "Yes," I said. Exactly the same way. He smiled, not with pride but with understanding. As for me, I learned to rest. To garden. To let my hands do things that didn't require strategy. The crack in the wall remained. A reminder. Not of damage, but of survival. People sometimes mistake quiet lives for small ones. Mine was neither. I didn't burn the world down. I didn't scream my victory. I didn't become what tried to destroy me. I stayed controlled. And in the end, that was the most devastating revenge of all. Time has a way of revealing what strength actually costs. After Raghav's death, something subtle shifted inside me, not grief, not relief, but a loosening. For years I had lived with my spine braced, senses sharpened, always anticipating the next move. Now the board was empty. The game was over. And for the first time in a long while, I had to decide who I was without resistance shaping my days. That question arrived quietly, disguised as ordinary moments. Standing in a grocery aisle, unable to remember why I'd come. Waking at dawn with no urgency pressing against my ribs. Hearing laughter in my own voice and pausing surprised. Control had been my armor. Without war, it became weight. I started walking in the mornings. No phone. No destination. Just streets I'd lived on for decades without truly seeing. I noticed small things. The way shopkeepers greeted regulars. How children trusted crosswalks without fear. How life continued without asking permission from the past. One morning a woman approached me in the park. Mid-30s, nervous hands, familiar eyes. They said you might help, she whispered, like we were doing something illegal. I almost said no, not out of fear, but exhaustion. Instead, I said, sit. She told me her story. Different names, same pattern. Power hiding behind paperwork. A son threatened, a system that rewarded silence. When she finished, she looked at me the way people look at doctors before hearing a diagnosis. I chose my words carefully. I won't fight for you, I said. Her face fell. But I'll teach you how to fight without losing yourself. She nodded, tears escaping despite her effort. That became my boundary. I didn't step into storms anymore. I taught people how to build roofs. Arav called one night, his voice unusually quiet. She's pregnant, he said. I closed my eyes, letting the news settle into places that had been hardened by years of vigilance. Are you happy? I asked. Yes, he said. Then, after a pause, terrified. I smiled. Good. That means you understand what matters. When my granddaughter was born, I held her like something fragile and ancient all at once. Her fingers wrapped around mine with unconscious authority. I felt something crack, not painfully, but completely. Love like this doesn't need control, it needs presence. As I rocked her to sleep, I promised her silently that she would never need to learn the lessons I did. That if the world tried to teach them anyway, she wouldn't face it alone. The past tested me one last time when a book proposal arrived in the mail. Someone wanted to tell my story, to package it, to dramatize it, to turn control into spectacle. I returned it unopened. Some stories lose their power when exposed to too much light. Years passed gently after that. Friends grew older, some passed on. New ones arrived without knowing what I'd survived, and that was a gift. Arav thrived, his family expanded. Lauder returned to the house, louder and less careful. On my 70th birthday, he asked me to make a speech. I stood looking at faces I loved, faces that had no idea how close I'd come to losing everything. I learned something late in life, I said. That strength doesn't announce itself, it whispers. It waits. And when it moves, it doesn't destroy, it corrects. They applauded. They smiled. They didn't fully understand. That was okay. That night alone, I sat in the study and opened the last file I'd kept. Not evidence. Not strategy. Just notes. Observations. Reminders of who I'd been. I closed it and placed it in a box. Control had served its purpose. I didn't need it anymore, not as a weapon, not as armor. The world outside was quiet, safe, imperfect, alive. And for the first time since those 3 measured knocks shattered my doorway, I slept without listening for footsteps. Not because danger no longer existed, but because I trusted myself to face it without becoming it. That was the real ending. And it was enough. The night before Arav's daughter learned to walk, I found myself awake again, old habit, stubborn as bone memory. The house was quiet, but not empty. There was a difference now. Silence no longer felt like a threat. It felt earned. I stood by the window and watched the street lamp flicker, remembering how fear once lived in small things: a ringing phone, a knock, footsteps behind me. Fear had trained me. Control had sharpened me. But love was teaching me how to loosen my grip without losing my strength. The next morning, she took 3 unsteady steps and fell into my arms, laughing like the world had never hurt anyone. In that moment, something inside me finally let go. Not the memory, not the lessons, just the need to stay braced. Years later, when people spoke about justice, they spoke loudly. They talked about exposure, punishment, spectacle. They asked me, quietly, privately, how I did it. How I stayed calm when my son was taken away in handcuffs. How I didn't shatter. I never gave them strategy. Because the truth was simpler and harder. I didn't win because I was ruthless, I won because I refused to panic. The system expected noise, rage, mistakes, I gave it patience. The people who tried to destroy my family expected desperation. I gave them silence. Silence made them careless. Carelessness made them visible. That's how power really falls. Not from force, but from being watched while it assumes it isn't. On my final visit to the old courthouse, years after everything had ended, I sat alone in the back row. No cases, no trials, just dust and light and echoes. I remembered the woman I had been the first time I sat there, heart racing. Hands folded tightly so no one would see them shake. I wished I could reach back through time and touch her shoulder. Not to warn her. To reassure her. You won't lose yourself, I would tell her. You will find out exactly who you are. When I left, I didn't look back. I never needed to again. On my 80th birthday, Arav asked me one last question. We were sitting in the garden, his daughter chasing butterflies, the air heavy with warmth and life. Do you think, he said carefully, that what they did shaped us forever? I thought about it. About scars that don't fade but stop hurting. About nights that once haunted me and now felt distant, like someone else's dreams. Yes, I said, but not the way they wanted. He smiled. How then? They wanted fear, I said. They created strength instead. He nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. That night, when the house fell quiet again, I opened the drawer where I kept the only thing left from that time. A folded piece of paper with my son's name printed in cold ink. An arrest record that once defined our lives. I held it for a long moment. Then I tore it in half, then again. Then again. I didn't burn it. I didn't dramatize it. I placed the pieces in the trash like something already finished. Because that's what true endings look like. Not fire. Not applause. Not revenge screaming its name into the dark. Just a woman standing upright after the storm, still herself, still standing, with everything that mattered intact. They tried to take my son. They failed. And they never understood why, because they thought control was domination. They never learned that real control is restraint, patience, and the courage to wait until the truth has no choice but to surface. That was my revenge. Quiet, permanent, unbreakable.